The sound of splintering wood and a horse's terrified scream still haunted Lydia Grace in her sleep, jolting her awake with cold sweat beading on her forehead in the Arizona heat. She pressed her palm against her racing heart, willing herself to remember that she was safe in her small room above the Mercantile in Winslow, Arizona, miles away from the ranch accident that had changed everything 6 months ago. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street as Lydia descended the narrow staircase, her hand gripping the railing tighter than necessary. Mrs. Henderson, the Mercantile owner who had taken pity on her and offered both employment and lodging, glanced up from arranging canned goods on the shelf. "Another nightmare?" the older woman asked gently, her weathered face creasing with concern. Lydia managed a weak smile and nodded. "They are getting less frequent, at least. Time heals most wounds, child, though I suspect some run deeper than others. Mrs. Henderson paused, studying Lydia with the careful attention of someone who had seen her share of tragedy in this harsh territory. "You know, avoiding them forever is not really living either." Lydia busied herself with straightening the fabric bolts, knowing exactly what Mrs. Henderson meant. In 6 months, she had not gone near a horse, not when the stage arrived with supplies, not when ranchers tied their mounts outside the store. She would find excuses to retreat to the back room, her hands trembling and her breath coming short until the animals were gone. The woman who had once ridden across the plains of Kansas with abandon, who had grown up in the saddle on her father's ranch, now could not bear to be within 20 feet of the creatures. The accident played through her mind in fragments, as it always did. The fence that needed repair, her father asking her to check the northern pasture, the mare she had ridden since she was 16, steady and reliable. Then the rattlesnake, the rearing, the fall. The second fall when she tried to remount, spooked and shaking. The third when her father's stallion, sensing the fear, had bolted with her barely in the saddle. She remembered the ground rushing up, the crack of her ribs, the darkness that swallowed her whole. When she woke 3 days later, her father sat beside her bed, aged a decade in those 72 hours. The doctor said she was lucky to be alive. Her father said they were moving to town, that he had sold the ranch to his foreman, that she would never have to ride again if she did not want to. But Winslow, Arizona territory in 1883 was not a place where a person could truly avoid horses. They were everywhere, as essential to life as water in this desert landscape. Lydia felt half a woman, incomplete and broken in ways that went beyond her healed ribs and faded bruises. The bell above the door chimed, and Lydia looked up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the bright morning light. As her eyes adjusted, she made out a man in his mid-20s, wearing a dusty brown hat, worn leather chaps, and a blue shirt faded from many washings. His face was tanned from long hours in the sun, with a strong jaw shadowed by a few days' stubble, and eyes the color of sage that held a quiet kindness. "Morning," he said, his voice low and warm like honey and tea. "I am looking for some grain and supplies. Heard this was the best mercantile in town." "It is the only mercantile in town," Mrs. Henderson called from the back, amusement in her voice. "But we appreciate the compliment nonetheless. Lydia will help you." The man removed his hat, revealing dark brown hair that needed a trim. He smiled at Lydia, and she found herself noticing the way the corners of his eyes crinkled, suggesting he smiled often. "Fletcher Quinn," he introduced himself, "just took over the old Morrison place east of town, trying to get the ranch operational again." "Lydia Grace," she replied, proud that her voice came out steady. "What kind of grain do you need?" As she helped Fletcher gather supplies, she learned he had come from Texas, had saved for years to buy his own land, and was determined to build something lasting in Arizona territory. He spoke with an earnestness that was refreshing, with none of the bravado she had come to associate with cowboys. "I have got 6 horses right now," Fletcher said as he examined a coil of rope, "looking to build the herd up slowly. Good horses, well-trained, that respond to patience rather than force. That is my philosophy anyway." Lydia's hands stilled on the bag of oats she was measuring. 6 horses. Which meant he had ridden one to town, probably tied outside right now. Fletcher must have noticed her sudden tension because his expression shifted to concern. "You all right, Miss Grace?" "Fine," she said quickly, too quickly. "Just let me get Mrs. Henderson to help carry these out to your horse." "Oh, I can manage." "She will help you," Lydia interrupted, already backing toward the storeroom, her heart hammering against her ribs. She heard Mrs. Henderson emerge and take over. heard the murmur of their voices, heard Fletcher's confused tone, asking if he had said something wrong. In the safety of the storeroom, Lydia pressed her forehead against the cool adobe wall and tried to calm her breathing. This was ridiculous. She was ridiculous. A grown woman of 23, reduced to hiding in a storage room because a customer mentioned horses. That evening, as Lydia helped Mrs. Henderson close up the store, the older woman brought up Fletcher Quinn again. Nice young man, polite, paid in full, no credit needed. Yes, he seemed very pleasant, Lydia agreed neutrally. He asked about you. Lydia's hands paused in sweeping the floor. Asked what? Whether you were married, whether you were spoken for? Mrs. Henderson's eyes twinkled. I told him no to both, but that you had been through a difficult time and might not be ready for courting. Mrs. Henderson! Well, it is the truth, is it not? The older woman softened her tone. But Lydia, dear, you cannot let fear rule your life forever. That young man has kind eyes, the sort who might understand given the chance. Lydia resumed, sweeping with more vigor than necessary. He is a rancher, a horseman. That is the last thing I need. Or perhaps exactly what you need, Mrs. Henderson murmured, but she let the subject drop. 3 days later, Fletcher Quinn returned to the mercantile, and then again 2 days after that. Each time he needed something, nails, a new bridle, coffee, flour, and each time he made polite conversation with Lydia, never pushing, never prying, just talking about the weather or the progress on his ranch, or asking her opinion on the quality of various goods. The windmill is finally working, he told her on his 4th visit, genuine excitement in his voice. Took me a week to get the mechanism right, but now I've got water pumping steady. You should see it, Miss Grace. The way the desert blooms when it has got water, it is like witnessing a miracle. Despite herself, Lydia found she enjoyed these brief conversations. Fletcher had a way of describing things that painted pictures in her mind, the red rocks glowing at sunset, the way the rain smelled when it finally came, the satisfaction of building something with his own hands. He never mentioned horses directly after that first day, though occasionally he would reference riding to town or checking his pastures. It was on his 5th visit that Mrs. Henderson, with a meddling nature that Lydia was beginning to recognize, suggested Fletcher might benefit from Lydia's knowledge of herbs and medicinal plants. She grew up on a ranch in Kansas, Mrs. Henderson explained, while Lydia shot her warning looks that went ignored. Knows all about treating animals and people both. Her mother was known for her healing remedies. Fletcher's interest was clearly piqued. That's so? I have got a mare with a cough I cannot seem to shake. Veterinarian in Flagstaff is more than a day's ride away. Do not suppose you would know anything that might help? Lydia felt trapped. On one hand, she did know exactly what would help a poultice of mullein and elderberry, steam treatments, and dry shelter. On the other hand, that would require going to his ranch, being near horses. I could write down a remedy for you, she offered weakly. That would be mighty kind. Fletcher's smile was warm and grateful, without any pressure behind it. That evening, Lydia carefully wrote out instructions for treating respiratory ailments in horses, her hand cramping as she tried to remember everything her mother had taught her. The words flowed more easily than she expected, and with them came a flood of memories, not of the accident, but of earlier, happier times. Learning to mix herbs at her mother's side, the satisfaction of watching a sick animal recover under their care, the connection she had once felt to the horses she tended, understanding their needs and temperaments. When Fletcher came by the next day to pick up more supplies, she handed him the folded paper. He read through it carefully, his brow furrowed in concentration. This is detailed, he said, impressed. You really know your medicine. The mare, her name is Juniper, by the way. I think this might be exactly what she needs. I hope it helps, Lydia said sincerely. Fletcher folded the paper and tucked it carefully into his shirt pocket. Then he looked at her directly, his sage green eyes serious. Miss Grace, I know it is not my place to ask, and you are free to tell me to mind my own business, but Mrs. Henderson mentioned you had an accident involving horses. I just want you to know, if you ever want to talk about it, or if there is anything I can do to help, I would be honored to listen. The sincerity in his voice nearly undid her. Lydia blinked rapidly, fighting back the sudden sting of tears. That is kind of you, Mr. Quinn, truly. But I do not think there is anything anyone can do. Maybe not, he agreed gently, but the offer stands, all the same. After he left, Mrs. Henderson came to stand beside Lydia at the window, watching Fletcher ride away on a sturdy buckskin gelding. He is patient, that one. Patient and steady. Those are good qualities in a man, especially out here. He is a customer, Lydia said firmly. Nothing more. But over the following weeks, as spring began to soften into early summer, Fletcher Quinn became something more than just a customer. He became a regular presence, stopping by town every few days, always with a reason to visit the mercantile, always with a kind word or an interesting story for Lydia. He told her about Juniper's recovery, how the remedy had worked perfectly, how the mare was back to her spirited self. He brought Lydia a small cactus flower, pressed between pages of an old book, saying it reminded him of her beautiful and resilient in harsh conditions. He asked her opinion on everything, from where to source lumber for a new barn to what color curtains he should buy for his ranch house. "Why are you asking me about curtains?" Lydia asked, amused despite herself. Fletcher grinned sheepishly. "Because I have got no eye for such things, and everything I choose ends up looking like a bunkhouse. Figure a place should feel like a home, not just a building. Who are you trying to impress?" The question came out before Lydia could stop it, tinged with something that might have been jealousy. His smile faded into something more serious, more vulnerable. "I suppose I am hoping that someday someone might want to share it with me. Someone who appreciates the work that goes into building something from nothing. Someone with a kind heart and a quick mind." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "Someone like you, Miss Grace, if I am being honest." Lydia's breath caught. She had known, on some level, that Fletcher's frequent visits were about more than supplies and friendly conversation. But hearing him state his intentions so plainly, with such quiet dignity, made her heart ache with a confusion of emotions. "Mr. Quinn, I cannot—" "Well, Fletcher," he interrupted gently. "Just Fletcher, and you do not have to say anything right now. I know I am not the smoothest talker, and I know you are dealing with something that hurts you. I just wanted you to know that I think you are remarkable, and I would like the chance to court you properly when you are ready. If you are ever ready." "I am broken," Lydia whispered, the words escaping before she could cage them. "I cannot even walk past a horse without my hands shaking. What kind of rancher's wife would I make?" Fletcher stepped closer, his expression fierce with a sudden intensity. "You are not broken. You are healing, and that is different. Healing takes time, and it is not a straight path. I learned that after I lost my brother to a riding accident 3 years back." Lydia looked up sharply. "You lost your brother?" "Thrown from a green-broke stallion. Broke his neck instantly." Fletcher's voice was steady, but pain flickered in his eyes. "I did not ride for almost 6 months after. Could not bring myself to do it. Every time I tried, I would see him falling, hear the sound of the impact. My father said I was being weak, that a cowboy who could not ride was useless. That nearly destroyed me, hearing that from the man I looked up to most." "What changed?" Lydia asked softly. "An old ranch hand named Pete. He did not push me, did not tell me to get over it or be tough. He just spent time with me around the horses, talking about my brother, letting me grieve. Then one day he asked if I would help him groom his mare. Just grooming, nothing else. And I found I could do that. Then leading her around the corral, then standing in the stirrup. Little steps, Miss Grace. That is how you rebuild trust, with patience and little steps." Lydia felt tears sliding down her cheeks before she realized she was crying. Fletcher reached out slowly, giving her time to step away if she wanted, and brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "I am not saying I can fix what happened to you," he said quietly, "but I am saying that if you want to try to heal, really heal, I would be honored to help. No pressure, no expectations, just patience and little steps." "Why?" Lydia asked, her voice breaking. "Why would you do that for me?" Fletcher's smile was tender. "Because somewhere between you helping me with Juniper's cough and arguing with me about the quality of those feed bags, I started falling for you. And when you care about someone, you help them face their fears. You do not run from them, and you do not let them face it alone." That night, Lydia lay awake in her small room, Fletcher's words echoing in her mind. She thought about the woman she had been before the accident, confident, capable, unafraid. She thought about the woman she had become, timid, limited, defined by her fear. And she thought about the woman she might still become, if she found the courage to try. The next morning, she found Fletcher at the livery stable on the edge of town. He was brushing down his buckskin gelding, his movements rhythmic and practiced. When he saw her approaching, he straightened, surprise and hope mingling on his face. "Miss Grace." "Lydia," she corrected, her voice trembling slightly. "If you are going to be Fletcher, then I should be Lydia." She took a deep breath, stopping about 15 feet from where the horse stood. This was as close as she had been to a horse in 6 months, and her heart was already racing. "And I think, if the offer still stands, I would like to try those little steps you mentioned." Fletcher's face broke into a grin so wide and genuine that Lydia felt some of her anxiety ease. "The offer absolutely still stands, but we are going to do this right, which means no horses today. Today, we just talk." "No horses?" Lydia was confused. "No horses," Fletcher confirmed. He tied the gelding securely, gave him a pat, and walked over to Lydia, deliberately putting distance between them and the animal. "First step is not about the horse at all. It is about you feeling safe enough to be near them. So today we just sit and talk, where you can see Thunder there, but you are not worried about him getting too close." They sat on a bench outside the livery in the shade of a cottonwood tree, where Lydia could keep the horse in her peripheral vision without feeling threatened. Fletcher talked about his plans for the ranch, about the barn he was building, about his dream of raising quality horses that could handle the harsh Arizona terrain. "Most people break horses," Fletcher explained, "force them to submit through fear and dominance. But I prefer a gentler method, building trust, showing them that working with humans does not have to mean pain or fear. Takes longer, but the result is a horse that is a true partner, not just a subdued animal." "That sounds like the way my mother trained," Lydia said, memories surfacing. "She always said a frightened horse was a dangerous horse, no matter how well trained it appeared. Your mother was a wise woman." They talked until the sun climbed high and the heat became oppressive, and through it all, Lydia remained aware of Thunder's presence but not panicked by it. When she finally stood to return to the mercantile, she realized with wonder that her hands had stopped shaking. "Same time tomorrow?" Fletcher asked hopefully. "Yes," Lydia agreed. "Same time tomorrow." And so began a routine that would define the next several weeks. Every morning, Lydia would meet Fletcher at the livery or at his ranch on her days off, and they would sit together near the horses. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes Fletcher would work on tack repair or other chores, while Lydia watched from a safe distance. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, that safe distance began to shrink. One week, Lydia managed to stand only 10 feet from Thunder. 2 weeks later, she could watch Fletcher saddle the gelding without her breath catching in panic. By the 3rd week, she reached out and touched Thunder's shoulder when Fletcher held the horse steady, her hand trembling but determined. "He is warm," she whispered, as if rediscovering something she had forgotten. "I had forgotten how warm they are." "He likes you," Fletcher said softly. "See how he is leaning into your touch? That is trust." But progress was not linear. Some days, Lydia would arrive and find she could not get within 20 feet of the horses without her chest tightening and her vision blurring. On those days, Fletcher never showed disappointment or frustration. He would simply lead the horses away, and they would spend time together doing other things, walking through town, having lunch at the small restaurant, sitting by the creek that ran behind his property when it had water. It was on one of these difficult days that Lydia finally told him the full story of her accident. They were sitting by the dry creek bed, the red rocks around them glowing in the late afternoon light, and the words poured out of her like water from a broken dam. She told him about the first fall, how her mare had been frightened by the rattlesnake, about remounting because that was what her father had taught her, get back on immediately, do not let fear take root, about the second fall, harder than the first, about her father insisting she ride back to the ranch house rather than walk, about the stallion that sensed her fear and bolted, about the 3rd fall that nearly killed her. 3 times, she said, her voice raw. I fell 3 times in one day, and each time I was more terrified, more certain I was going to die. By the end, I wanted to die. I remember thinking, as I fell that last time, that at least if I died it would be over. I would not have to feel that fear anymore. Fletcher listened without interrupting, his hand finding hers and holding it gently. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, and Lydia feared she had revealed too much, shown too much weakness. "Your father was wrong," Fletcher finally said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Making you remount when you were already injured and frightened, that was cruel, even if he meant well. And putting you on a stallion, a fear-sensitive stallion when you were already traumatized, that was worse than cruel. That was dangerous and foolish. Lydia had spent months blaming herself for being weak, for not being able to just get over it. Hearing Fletcher place the blame where it truly belonged on the decisions that had been made that day, not on her fear, was like releasing a weight she had not known she was carrying. "I love my father," she said quietly, "but you were right. He handled it all wrong." "Where is he now?" Fletcher asked. "Living in Flagstaff with his sister. We write occasionally, but things have been strained since the move. He does not understand why I cannot just move past it." Lydia looked down at their joined hands. "I think he feels guilty, so he wants me to be fine so he can stop feeling guilty. That is his burden to carry, not yours." Fletcher squeezed her hand. "Your only job is to heal at your own pace, in your own way." As spring turned fully into summer, Lydia found herself spending more and more time at Fletcher's ranch. It was a beautiful property, she had to admit, with a view of the red rocks that made the landscape look like it was on fire at sunset. Fletcher had worked tirelessly to improve it, building sturdy corrals, repairing the ranch house, cultivating a small garden near the house where he tried to coax vegetables from the stubborn desert soil. "It is not Kansas," he said ruefully, looking at his struggling tomato plants. "But I am determined to make something grow here besides sagebrush and patience." Lydia laughed, the sound coming more easily these days. "You need more water and some shade cloth. The sun here is too intense for direct planting." "See, this is why I need you around," Fletcher said, and though his tone was light, his eyes were serious. "You make everything better." Their relationship had deepened from friendship into something more profound, though they had maintained a respectful propriety that Mrs. Henderson loudly proclaimed was admirable but unnecessary. Fletcher had kissed Lydia for the first time the previous week, a gentle, tentative kiss that had left her feeling like the world had shifted on its axis. "I have been wanting to do that for months," he had admitted, his forehead resting against hers. "I have been wanting you to," she had replied, surprising herself with her boldness. But even as their romance bloomed, the work with the horses continued. Fletcher introduced Lydia to each of his 6 horses individually, letting her learn their personalities and quirks. There was Thunder, his steady buckskin gelding who was as reliable as sunrise. Juniper, the mare Lydia had helped cure, who was spirited and playful. A matched pair of bays named Salt and Pepper, despite their coloring, who were trained for wagon work. A young paint mare named Rosie, who was still learning. And Cisco, an older gelding with a gentle disposition who seemed to understand that humans sometimes needed extra patience. "Cisco is special," Fletcher explained as Lydia cautiously stroked the gelding's neck. "He was Pete's horse, the ranch hand I told you about. When Pete passed last year, he left Cisco to me. This horse has seen it all and never gets rattled by anything." It was Cisco that Fletcher suggested Lydia try to groom first. "Just brushing," he said. "I will hold his lead rope the entire time, and if you need to stop, we stop. No questions asked." Lydia's hands shook as she picked up the brush, but Cisco stood perfectly still, his brown eyes half closed in contentment. The first stroke of the brush felt monumental, a bridge being built over a vast chasm of fear. The second stroke came easier. By the 10th, Lydia felt tears streaming down her face, but this time they were tears of triumph. "I am doing it," she whispered. "Fletcher, I am really doing it. You are amazing," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Absolutely amazing." They spent weeks on grooming until Lydia could brush down any of Fletcher's horses without panic. Then came leading them around the corral, then cleaning their hooves. Each task was a small victory, each victory building her confidence brick by brick. But the true test would be riding, and both Lydia and Fletcher knew it. "We do not have to," Fletcher said one evening as they sat on the porch of his ranch house, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "You have already come so far. If you never ride again, that does not change anything between us." "I want to," Lydia said, and she was surprised to find it was true. "Not because I have to, but because I want to reclaim that part of myself, the part that loved riding, that felt free on horseback. The accident took that from me, and I want it back." Fletcher pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Then we will get it back. Together." They chose Cisco for her first ride, and they prepared for weeks. Fletcher had Lydia sit on a saddle set on a fence rail, letting her get comfortable with the feeling of the leather again. Then sitting on Cisco while the horse was standing still in the corral. Then sitting on Cisco while Fletcher led him a single step, 2 steps, 3. The day Lydia decided she was ready to actually ride, her father arrived unexpectedly in Winslow. She was at the mercantile, restocking shelves, when Harold Grace walked through the door. He looked older than she remembered, more gray in his hair, more lines around his eyes. They stared at each other for a long moment. "Hello, Lydia," he said finally. "Mrs. Henderson wrote me, said you had been working with horses again. I had to see for myself." Anger flared in Lydia's chest, surprising in its intensity. "You came to check on me? Now? Where were you 6 months ago when I was terrified to sleep because of the nightmares? Where were you when I could not walk down the street without panicking?" Harold flinched. "I know I handled things poorly after the accident. I could not bear to see you hurting and know it was my fault. So you left." Lydia's voice was cold. "You sold the ranch, moved us away from everything familiar, and then left me here alone to deal with it all. I thought giving you space was what you needed." "I needed my father." The words burst from her like a dam breaking. "I needed you to tell me it was not my fault, that I was not weak or broken. But instead, you disappeared because facing me reminded you that you made mistakes that day. Well, here is the truth. Father, you did make mistakes, terrible ones, but I have spent months learning to forgive myself for being afraid, and I suppose I can extend that same forgiveness to you." Harold's eyes filled with tears. "I am so sorry, Lydia, sorrier than you can know. When your mother died, I thought I had to be hard, had to teach you to be tough for this harsh world, but I went too far, and I nearly lost you because of it." They talked for hours, clearing air that had been thick with resentment and guilt. Lydia told him about Fletcher, about the patient work of rebuilding trust, about the love that had grown between them. Harold listened, and for perhaps the first time, truly heard her. "I would like to meet this young man," Harold said. "If he has helped you find your way back to yourself, he must be something special." Fletcher and Harold met the next day at the ranch, and Lydia watched nervously as the 2 most important men in her life sized each other up. Fletcher extended his hand with respect, but not deference, meeting Harold's assessing gaze steadily. "Mr. Grace, I understand you were here to check on Lydia's welfare. I want you to know that I care for your daughter deeply, and my intentions are completely honorable. I hope to marry her, with your blessing, when she is ready." Harold's eyebrows rose slightly at Fletcher's directness, but then he smiled. "A man who speaks his mind. I appreciate that. And Lydia seems happy, truly happy, for the first time since before the accident. You have my blessing, Mr. Quinn." "Fletcher," the younger man corrected. "Please, call me Fletcher. Only if you call me Harold." With her father's presence providing unexpected support, Lydia decided the time had come to attempt a full ride. They gathered in Fletcher's main corral, Lydia, Fletcher, and Harold. Cisco stood patiently as Fletcher checked the saddle one more time, making sure everything was secure and comfortable. "Remember," Fletcher said, holding Lydia's gaze with his steady one, "we can stop at any point. You are in control here, always." Lydia nodded, her mouth dry, but her resolve firm. She approached Cisco, laid her hand on his warm neck, and felt the horse's steady heartbeat under her palm. "All right, boy, let us do this together." With Fletcher supporting her, Lydia put her foot in the stirrup. This was the moment that always triggered the panic in her practice sessions, the commitment to mounting, the vulnerability of being partially on and partially off. Her breath came faster, and she felt the familiar edge of panic rising. "Breathe," Fletcher murmured. "You are safe. I am right here, Cisco is steady, and you can stop any time." Lydia forced air into her lungs and swung her leg over, settling into the saddle. For a moment, nothing happened. She sat there, high above the ground, on top of a living animal that could bolt at any moment. And then, instead of panic, she felt something else, a flicker of the old joy, the old freedom. "I am on a horse," she said wonderingly. "Fletcher, I am really on a horse." "You are magnificent," Fletcher said, his face radiating pride and love. They started slow, just sitting, while Cisco stood still, letting Lydia adjust to the feeling. Then Fletcher led Cisco on a walk around the corral, one slow step at a time. Lydia's hands gripped the saddle horn, white-knuckled at first, but gradually she relaxed, remembering the rhythm of a horse's movement, the gentle sway that had once been as natural to her as breathing. "Want to try holding the reins?" Fletcher asked after several circuits. Lydia nodded, her heart pounding, but her fear manageable. Fletcher handed her the reins, and for the first time in 6 months, she was truly riding again. Tears streamed down her face as Cisco walked calmly around the corral, responding to her gentle cues. "That is my girl," Harold shouted from the fence, his own face wet with tears. "That is my strong, brave girl." When Lydia finally dismounted, her legs were shaking from adrenaline and emotion. Fletcher caught her in his arms, holding her close as she sobbed against his chest, great heaving sobs of relief and release and triumph. "You did it," he murmured into her hair. "I knew you could, but you had to find it in yourself. I am so proud of you." "I could not have done it without you," Lydia said, pulling back to look at him. "You gave me back a part of myself I thought was lost forever. How do I ever thank you for that?" Fletcher's smile was tender. "By marrying me, that is thanks enough." The proposal was not a surprise. They had been moving toward this inevitability for weeks. But hearing the words still made Lydia's heart soar. Yes, 1,000 times, yes. They married in late September 1883, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Winslow. Henderson cried through the entire service, declaring them the most beautiful couple she had ever seen. Harold walked Lydia down the aisle, whispering that her mother would have loved Fletcher and been proud of her courage. Lydia wore a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes, with wildflowers in her hair that Fletcher had picked that morning. Fletcher wore his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed for once, his eyes never leaving Lydia as she approached. "I promise to be patient with you always," Fletcher said during his vows, his voice carrying through the small church. "To support your strengths and help you through your weaknesses, as I know you will do for me. I promise to build a life with you where we both feel safe to be vulnerable, to fail, and to grow." Lydia's vows were equally heartfelt. "I promise to be brave with you by my side, to face my fears knowing you will catch me if I fall. I promise to love you not just for helping me heal, but for being exactly who you are, patient, kind, and true." The kiss they shared sealed not just their marriage, but the bond that had been forged through months of trust-building and shared vulnerability. The wedding celebration was small but joyful, held at Fletcher's ranch with food contributed by various townspeople who had watched their courtship with interest. As the sun set in a blaze of color over the red rocks, Lydia stood with Fletcher's arms around her, feeling completely at peace for the first time since the accident. "Happy, Mrs. Quinn?" Fletcher asked, his breath warm against her ear. "Deliriously so," Lydia replied, turning in his arms to kiss him properly. Their married life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Lydia moved into the ranch house, bringing her few possessions and her extensive knowledge of herbs and healing. She set up a still room, where she prepared remedies not just for animals, but for people as well. And soon folks from Winslow and the surrounding ranches were seeking her out for her medicines. Fletcher continued building his horse breeding operation, with Lydia now working alongside him. She discovered that her months of learning to trust again had given her insights into working with difficult horses. When Fletcher acquired a traumatized mare that had been abused by her previous owner, it was Lydia who slowly, patiently brought the horse back to confidence. "You understand her," Fletcher said, watching Lydia work with the mare they had named Hope. "You know what it is like to be afraid and need someone to prove the world is not all pain. We all deserve a second chance," Lydia said, carefully brushing tangles from Hope's mane, while the mare stood trembling but trusting. People and animals alike. Their first winter together was mild by most standards, but harsh for Arizona, with cold winds sweeping down from the mountains, and occasional frosts that killed Fletcher's still struggling garden. But inside their ranch house, with a fire crackling in the hearth and their bodies tangled together in their bed, Lydia felt warmer and safer than she ever had. They talked long into those winter nights, sharing dreams and fears and memories. Fletcher told her about growing up in Texas, about the brother he had lost, about the loneliness he had felt before meeting her. Lydia shared stories about her mother, about growing up on the Kansas ranch, about the woman she was becoming now that she had conquered her greatest fear. I am not the same person I was before the accident, Lydia said one night, her head resting on Fletcher's bare chest. But I do not think I want to be. That person was confident but reckless. I never truly appreciated what I had because I had never lost anything. Now I know how precious this is, how easily it could have been taken from me. Fletcher's arms tightened around her. I love who you are now, and I would have loved who you were then. But you are right, surviving something difficult does change a person. The question is whether it makes you bitter or better. You made me better, Lydia whispered. Your patience, your kindness, your refusal to let me give up on myself. You made me better. Spring brought new life to the ranch. 3 of their mares foaled, including Juniper, who produced a beautiful colt with his mother's spirit and his father's steady temperament. Lydia was present for all 3 births, her fear replaced by wonder at the miracle of new life. Look at him, she breathed, watching the colt struggle to his feet for the first time, all long legs and determination. He is perfect. What should we name him? Fletcher asked, his arm around Lydia's waist. Courage, Lydia said immediately, because that is what this place, this life, has taught me. In May, Lydia realized she had not had her monthly courses in some time. The local doctor confirmed what she suspected: she was pregnant, due sometime in late December or early January. Fletcher's reaction was pure joy, spinning her around in the yard until she was dizzy and laughing, demanding he put her down before she got sick. We are going to have a baby, he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. A baby, Lydia. A whole new person made of both of us. Are you hoping for a boy or a girl? Lydia asked that night, lying in bed with Fletcher's hands splayed protectively over her still flat stomach. Healthy, Fletcher said firmly. That is all I hope for. Boy or girl, I will love them with everything I have. He paused, then added more quietly, though I suppose I imagine a daughter with your eyes and your courage. Lydia's pregnancy was relatively easy, though the Arizona summer heat made her uncomfortable. Fletcher was constantly concerned, bringing her water, making sure she stayed in the shade, doing extra work so she could rest. It was sweet if occasionally overwhelming. I am pregnant, not made of glass, Lydia finally told him in August, when he tried to prevent her from grooming horses. I need to stay active, not be treated like an invalid. I know, Fletcher said, running his hand through his hair in frustration. I just worry. What if something happens? What if I lose you? Lydia took his face in her hands, making him look at her. Life has no guarantees. We both know that better than most. But living in fear of what might happen means not fully living at all. I spent 6 months doing that after my accident, and I refuse to go back to that place. This baby is a blessing, and I intend to enjoy every moment of this experience. Fear be damned. Fletcher pulled her close, careful of her swelling belly. You are the bravest person I know. You humble me daily. Harold visited again in September, staying for 2 weeks to help with ranch work and fuss over his pregnant daughter. The relationship between father and daughter had healed significantly over the past year, built on honest conversations and mutual forgiveness. Your mother would have been beside herself with excitement, Harold said one evening, his hand resting gently on Lydia's belly. She always wanted grandchildren. Tell me about her when she was pregnant with me, Lydia asked. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the rocks in shades of fire. Harold's eyes grew distant with memory. She glowed. That is what people say, but with your mother, it was true. She had this light about her, this joy that was infectious. Even when she was uncomfortable or tired, she never complained. Said bringing you into the world was the greatest adventure she would ever have. I miss her, Lydia said quietly. Especially now. There is so much I want to ask her. She lives on in you, Harold said. Your strength, your compassion, your gift for healing. All of that came from her. The leaves on the cottonwood trees began to turn gold, and the brutal summer heat gave way to crisp autumn air. Lydia's belly grew round and pronounced, and the baby began to kick with vigor, usually right when Lydia was trying to sleep. Your child is a night owl, she complained to Fletcher one night, feeling a particularly strong kick to her ribs. Fletcher laid his hand on her stomach, his face lighting up as he felt the baby move. Strong, too. Takes after both parents. They prepared the small second bedroom for the baby, painting it a cheerful yellow and building a cradle from pine wood. Mrs. Henderson organized a gathering of the local women who brought tiny clothes and blankets, offering advice and support. Lydia was touched by how the community had embraced her, how these strong frontier women welcomed her as one of their own. December arrived with unseasonably cold weather and even a dusting of snow on the higher elevations, visible from their ranch. Lydia felt increasingly uncomfortable, her back aching and her ankles swollen. The doctor said the baby would likely come after Christmas, but babies had their own schedules. On December 18th, Lydia woke before dawn with cramping pains in her lower back. She lay quietly for a while, not wanting to wake Fletcher unnecessarily. But as the pains grew stronger and more regular, she knew the time had come. "Fletcher," she said, shaking his shoulder gently, "the baby is coming." Fletcher was instantly awake, his eyes wide with a combination of excitement and terror. Now? Right now? Should I get the doctor? Should I boil water? What do I do? Despite her discomfort, Lydia could not help but smile at his panic. "Yes, get the doctor. And Mrs. Henderson. And stay calm, please. This is going to take a while." Fletcher rode into town at a speed that would have impressed a cavalry soldier, returning with Dr. Morrison and Mrs. Henderson within the hour. By then, Lydia's contractions were coming regularly, each one stealing her breath and making her grip the bedpost until her knuckles turned white. "You are doing beautifully," Mrs. Henderson said, wiping Lydia's forehead with a cool cloth. "First babies take their time, but everything is progressing normally." Fletcher was relegated to pacing in the main room, occasionally peeking in until Mrs. Henderson would shoo him away. The hours dragged on, the winter sun climbing to its zenith and beginning its descent. Lydia labored through the afternoon, drawing on reserves of strength she had not known she possessed. "I cannot do this," she gasped during a particularly difficult contraction. "It is too much." "You can," Mrs. Henderson said firmly. "You are one of the strongest women I know, Lydia Quinn. If you can face down your fears and learn to trust horses again, you can certainly bring this baby into the world." As evening shadows began to lengthen, Dr. Morrison announced that it was time to push. Lydia bore down with everything she had. Fletcher finally allowed, back into the room, to hold her hand and whisper encouragement. The pain was overwhelming, all-consuming, but underneath it was a fierce determination. With a final exhausting push, the baby emerged into the world with a lusty cry that echoed through the ranch house. "It is a boy," Dr. Morrison announced, placing the squalling infant on Lydia's chest. "A healthy, perfect boy." Lydia looked down at her son, his face red and scrunched, his tiny fists waving angrily at the cold air, and felt a love so profound it nearly stopped her heart. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." Fletcher was openly crying, his hand reaching out to touch the baby's downy head with reverent gentleness. "He is beautiful. You are beautiful. I love you both so much I cannot find the words." They named him Samuel Fletcher Quinn, Samuel for Fletcher's lost brother, and Fletcher for his father. Little Samuel was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his mother's dark hair and his father's sage green eyes. The first months of parenthood were exhausting, but joyful. Lydia marveled at how such a tiny person could completely transform their lives. Fletcher was a devoted father, walking Samuel around the house when he fussed at night, singing him cowboy ballads in his low, rumbling voice, looking at his son with such naked adoration that it made Lydia fall in love with him all over again. "I never knew I could feel like this," Fletcher admitted one night, holding Samuel while the baby slept peacefully against his chest. "Like my heart is walking around outside my body." "That is parenthood," Lydia agreed, watching them with a soft smile, terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. Spring came again, bringing with it new challenges and new joys. Samuel grew rapidly, his personality emerging curious and determined, with his father's patience and his mother's courage. Harold visited frequently, besotted with his grandson, often staying for weeks at a time to help with ranch work so Fletcher and Lydia could focus on the baby. When Samuel was 4 months old, Lydia decided it was time to ride again properly. She had been doing short rides around the property, but she wanted to feel truly free on horseback again, to ride out across the open land the way she once had. "Are you sure?" Fletcher asked, always protective. "There is no rush." "I am sure," Lydia said firmly. "I need to do this, not because I have something to prove, but because I want to remember who I was and who I have become. They chose a clear morning in late April, with Harold staying at the house to watch Samuel. Lydia saddled Cisco herself, her hands steady and sure. When she mounted, there was no fear, only anticipation. Fletcher swung up onto Thunder, and together they rode out across the ranch, heading toward the red rocks that glowed in the morning sun. The wind in her face, the rhythm of the horse beneath her, the vast open sky above Lydia felt complete in a way she had not since before her accident. She urged Cisco into a canter, then a gallop, Fletcher keeping pace beside her, both of them laughing with pure exhilaration. They finally pulled up on a rise overlooking the ranch, the horses blowing hard, their riders breathless and grinning. "I feel alive," Lydia said, turning to Fletcher. "Truly, completely alive." Fletcher leaned over from his saddle to kiss her, slow and deep. "You are magnificent. Watching you ride just now, seeing that joy on your face, it reminded me of why I fell in love with you in the first place. Your spirit, your resilience, your refusal to let fear win." "Fear did not win," Lydia agreed. "But more importantly, I did not have to fight it alone. You stood beside me through every step, never pushing, but always believing. That made all the difference." They sat there on the rise, looking out at the land they had built their life on, at the ranch house where their son slept peacefully, at the future stretching out before them, full of possibility and promise. Life settled into a beautiful rhythm over the next few years. The ranch prospered, with Fletcher's gentle training methods producing horses that were highly sought after across the territory. Lydia's reputation as a healer grew, and she began teaching other women her herbal remedies, passing on the knowledge her mother had given her. Samuel grew into a bright, active toddler, then a curious child who followed his father around the ranch, asking endless questions and showing an early affinity for the horses. By the time he was 3, he was helping to groom the gentler animals, standing on a stool to reach their backs, his small face serious with concentration. "He is a natural," Fletcher said proudly, watching Samuel carefully brush Cisco's mane, just like his mother. In the spring of 1887, Lydia realized she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was harder. She was more tired, more uncomfortable. But Samuel's excitement about becoming a big brother was infectious, and Fletcher's joy at expanding their family gave her strength. "Do you think it is a girl this time?" Samuel asked one evening, his hand on his mother's swollen belly. "I want a sister to teach things to." "We will love whoever joins our family," Lydia told him. "Boy or girl, they will be lucky to have you as a big brother." Their daughter arrived in December of 1887, almost exactly 4 years after Samuel's birth. Emma Grace Quinn came into the world during a rare snowfall, with tiny, perfect features and her mother's dark eyes. Samuel was besotted immediately, insisting on helping with everything from diaper changes to bath time. "She is so small," he whispered, carefully holding his sister under his mother's watchful eye. "I will protect her always." Fletcher looked at his family, his strong, beautiful wife, his earnest son, his perfect daughter, and felt his heart might burst from the fullness of it all. "How did I get so lucky?" he asked Lydia that night, both children finally asleep. "Not luck," Lydia said, nestling into his embrace. "Love and patience and trust. The same things you taught me with the horses, the same foundation we have built our entire life on." The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Samuel grew tall and serious, with his father's steady nature and his mother's compassion. Emma was fierce and fearless, riding before she could barely walk, afraid of nothing. They had one more child, a son they named Thomas, born in 1890, who had his father's green eyes and a laugh that could light up a room. The ranch expanded, Fletcher taking on a few hired hands to help with the growing operation. They built a larger barn, added more corrals, and began breeding cattle alongside the horses. Lydia's healing practice grew as well, and she trained several young women from town in herbal medicine, ensuring her mother's knowledge would be passed down to future generations. Harold spent his final years living with them, growing old surrounded by the grandchildren who adored him. He passed peacefully in his sleep in 1893, content in the knowledge that his daughter was happy and thriving. "He made peace with his mistakes," Lydia said at his funeral, standing beside Fletcher with their children gathered around. "In the end, that is all any of us can do: acknowledge our faults, make amends where we can, and move forward with love." As the century drew to a close, Lydia and Fletcher found themselves sitting on their porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the red rocks in shades of fire, just as they had done countless times before. But this time, they were not alone. Samuel and his new wife sat nearby. Emma was in the corral working with a young filly, and Thomas was in the house supposedly doing homework, but probably reading adventure novels instead. "Do you ever think about how different life could have been?" Lydia asked, her hand finding Fletcher's in the familiar, comfortable way of long marriage. "If I had never come to Winslow, if you had not been patient enough to help me heal?" Fletcher squeezed her hand, his sage green eyes still holding the same kindness they had that first day in the mercantile. "I try not to think about that. The thought of a world where I did not know you, did not love you, did not build this life with you, it is too terrible to contemplate." "We have been blessed," Lydia said softly, "with each other, with our children, with this land and this life. There were times, right after my accident, when I thought I would never feel whole again. But you showed me that being whole does not mean being fearless. It means having the courage to face our fears and the wisdom to accept help when we need it." "You taught me just as much," Fletcher countered, "about patience, about the strength it takes to be vulnerable, about how love is not just about the grand gestures, but about showing up every day, doing the small things that build trust and connection." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Inside the house, they could hear Thomas laughing at something, and from the corral, Emma's voice praising her horse. The sounds of family, of home, of a life well lived. "I would not change a single thing," Lydia said finally. "Not even the accident, because it brought me here, to you, to this exact moment. Every fear I faced, every small step I took toward healing, led me to this beautiful life." Fletcher raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with the same tenderness he had shown her from the beginning. "Then I suppose I should thank that rattlesnake, though it pains me to say it. Without that catalyst, we might never have found each other." "We would have found each other," Lydia said with certainty. "Maybe in a different way, at a different time, but we would have found each other. Some things are simply meant to be." As full darkness fell and the desert stars blazed overhead in their millions, Fletcher and Lydia Quinn sat together on their porch, hands clasped, hearts full, surrounded by the life they had built from patience and love and trust. The horses in the corral settled for the night, their soft snorts and the rustle of their movement a familiar lullaby. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the moon. Lydia thought about the woman she had been broken and afraid, convinced she would never heal. And she thought about the woman she had become strong and whole, wife and mother and healer, a woman who had faced her greatest fear and conquered it not through force but through patient, persistent courage. "Thank you," she whispered to Fletcher, not for the first time, and certainly not for the last. "For seeing past my fear to who I really was, for believing I could heal when I did not believe it myself, for loving me through the difficult days and celebrating with me through the triumphs." "Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life," Fletcher replied, his voice rough with emotion even after all these years. "Every single day, from that first moment in the mercantile to this very second, you have been my greatest adventure." They remained there until the cold night air drove them inside, where their children waited, where warmth and love and family filled every corner of the house they had made into a home. And as Lydia climbed into bed beside her husband, his arms wrapping around her in the way that had become second nature over their years together, she felt a profound sense of gratitude and peace. The nightmares of falling had long since ceased. In their place were dreams of flying, of racing across open land on horseback. The wind in her hair, fear nothing but a distant memory. And when she woke in the morning, to the sound of her husband's steady breathing and the desert sun streaming through the window, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The years continued their steady march forward. Samuel took over more of the ranch operations as Fletcher began to slow down, bringing new ideas while respecting the foundation his father had built. Emma married a young rancher from Flagstaff, a man who respected her fierce independence and shared her love of horses. Thomas became a veterinarian, studying in California before returning home to practice, continuing the family tradition of caring for animals with skill and compassion. Grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch with noise and laughter and the chaotic joy of new life. Fletcher built them a treehouse in the cottonwood tree, and Lydia taught them to identify healing herbs and make remedies. Every child learned to ride, and Lydia discovered that teaching the next generation, watching small bodies gain confidence in the saddle, was healing in its own way, proof that the cycle of fear could be broken, that trust could be rebuilt. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Fletcher surprised Lydia with a trip to Kansas, back to the land where she had grown up. They rode across the plains together, visiting the spot where her family's ranch had stood, now operated by new owners who welcomed them warmly. "It is strange," Lydia said, looking out across the familiar rolling grassland. "This was home for so long, and I loved it. But it does not pull at me anymore. Home is Arizona now. Home is wherever you are." "You gave up a lot to build a life with me," Fletcher said quietly. "Left your home, faced your fears, created something entirely new. I do not know if I ever properly thanked you for that." Lydia turned to face him, cupping his weathered face in her hands. "You thank me every day by being exactly who you are, by loving me and our children with your whole heart, by building a life that feels safe and full and right. That is thanks enough." They returned to Winslow renewed, ready for whatever the next chapter of their lives would bring. Fletcher began teaching Samuel's oldest son the finer points of horse training, passing down the gentle methods that had defined his career. Lydia compiled her mother's recipes and her own discoveries into a book, carefully writing out each remedy and its uses so that the knowledge would not be lost. As they moved into their 40s and then their 50s, Fletcher and Lydia found a new rhythm to their relationship. The passionate fire of youth had mellowed into something deeper and more sustaining, a love built on decades of shared experiences, of weathering difficulties together, of choosing each other every single day. "Do you remember teaching me to trust horses again?" Lydia asked one evening, the two of them alone in the house for a rare quiet moment. "All those mornings at the livery, sitting farther and farther away while you worked? I remember thinking you were the most beautiful, bravest woman I had ever seen," Fletcher replied, "and being terrified that I would push too hard or not hard enough, that I would somehow fail you. You never failed me, not once in all these years." Fletcher smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening in the way that Lydia found utterly endearing. "We never failed each other. That is what partnership really is. Two people committed to supporting each other through whatever life brings, the good and the bad, the triumphs and the failures, all of it together." They celebrated their 25th anniversary surrounded by children and grandchildren. 3 generations gathered to honor the love that had started it all. Samuel gave a toast, his voice thick with emotion, as he thanked his parents for showing him what a good marriage looked like. Emma read a poem she had written about courage and trust. Thomas presented them with a painting he had commissioned of the ranch, every detail lovingly rendered. "To 25 more years," Fletcher said, raising his glass to Lydia. "To forever," she corrected, her eyes shining with happy tears. "To whatever time we have left, making every moment count." As they moved into the new century, the world around them changed rapidly. Arizona territory inched closer to statehood. The railroad expanded, bringing more people west. Automobiles began to appear, strange mechanical contraptions that spooked the horses. But through it all, the ranch remained a constant, a place where time moved at the pace of the seasons, where life was measured in the growth of children and the training of horses. Fletcher's hair turned fully gray, then white. Lydia's hands developed arthritis that made some of her detailed healing work difficult, but they adapted, finding new ways to contribute, new roles to fill. Fletcher focused on teaching rather than doing the heavy labor. Lydia trained younger women to take over the more delicate preparations, while she focused on consultation and diagnosis. They were sitting on their porch one evening in the spring of 1908, celebrating their 25th anniversary with just the two of them, when Lydia turned to Fletcher with a serious expression. "I want you to know something," she said, taking his hand. "If I had to do it all over again, the accident, the fear, the long months of healing, I would do it in a heartbeat if it meant ending up here with you. Every moment of pain was worth it for this life we have built." Fletcher's eyes filled with tears, something that happened more easily these days. "I love you, Lydia Quinn. I have loved you from the moment you tried to hide from thunder in the mercantile storeroom. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Lydia replied. "My patient, steadfast cowboy who taught me that trust is not given all at once but built slowly, brick by brick, until you have constructed something unshakable, They kissed then, soft and sweet, a kiss that contained 25 years of marriage, 3 children, countless challenges overcome, and a love that had only deepened with time. When they finally pulled apart, the Arizona stars were blazing overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss, their wedding, the births of their children, every significant moment of their shared life. "What do you think happens next?" Lydia asked, gesturing to the vast desert sky. "After all this, what comes after? More of the same, I hope," Fletcher said contentedly. "More mornings waking up next to you, more evenings watching the sunset, more moments of ordinary grace that make a life extraordinary." That sounds perfect, and it was. The years that followed brought new joys and new challenges, as all years do. There were losses, friends who passed, horses who reached the end of their lives, the inevitable sorrows that come with living. But there were triumphs too, grandchildren's graduations, Emma's daughter winning a prestigious horse show, Thomas opening his own veterinary practice in Flagstaff, Samuel being elected to the territorial legislature. Through it all, Fletcher and Lydia remained each other's constant, each other's home. They still rode together when Fletcher's knees allowed it, still sat on the porch every evening, watching the sun set over the red rocks, still held hands like newlyweds despite the decades between them. On their 30th anniversary, their children threw them a grand celebration. The entire town of Winslow came, along with ranchers from miles around, all of them touched in some way by the couple who had built something beautiful from patience and love. "Tell us the story again," one of the grandchildren begged, "about how Grandma was afraid of horses and Grandpa helped her not be afraid anymore." Lydia looked at Fletcher, and they shared a smile full of shared memory and enduring love. "It is not really a story about horses," Lydia began, pulling the child onto her lap. "It is a story about trust, about how sometimes we need someone to believe in us before we can believe in ourselves, about how love means being patient with each other's fears and celebrating each other's courage." "Grandpa waited for Grandma," the child said solemnly, having heard the story many times before. "He did not push her or get mad when she was scared." "That is right," Fletcher confirmed, "because when you love someone, you meet them where they are, not where you want them to be. You give them the time and space they need to heal, and you walk beside them through the difficult parts." "And then Grandma got brave again," the child concluded with satisfaction. "And they got married and had babies and lived happily ever after." "The happiest," Lydia agreed, her eyes meeting Fletcher's over the child's head. "The absolute happiest." As the sun set on their 30th anniversary celebration, casting the world in shades of gold and amber, Fletcher and Lydia Quinn stood together in the yard of the ranch they had built, surrounded by the family they had created and the community they had served. 3 decades had passed since a frightened woman and a patient cowboy had begun the slow work of rebuilding trust, and those decades had been filled with more love and joy than either of them had dreamed possible. "No regrets?" Fletcher asked softly, his arm around Lydia's waist. "Not a single one," Lydia replied, leaning into his solid warmth. "Every step of this journey, every moment of fear overcome, every challenge faced together, it all led to this. And this is everything I ever wanted, even when I did not know to want it." The stars began to appear overhead, the same desert stars that had witnessed their entire love story. And as Fletcher and Lydia walked back toward their house, their steps in perfect synchronization after 30 years of walking side by side, they knew with absolute certainty that they had built something that would endure long after they were gone, a legacy of patience, trust, and love that would echo through generations. In the quiet of their bedroom that night, wrapped in each other's arms, Lydia thought about the woman she had been when she first came to Winslow broken, afraid, convinced she would never be whole again, and she marveled at the journey that had brought her here, to this moment, to this man, to this life. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness, "for every patient moment, every gentle word, every time you believed in me when I could not believe in myself. Thank you for teaching me to trust again not just horses, but life itself. Thank you for loving me." Fletcher's response was a kiss to her forehead, tender and reverent. "Thank you for letting me love you, for being brave enough to heal, for building this beautiful life with me. You are, and always have been, the greatest gift of my life." They fell asleep as they had every night for 30 years, wrapped around each other, hearts beating in synchronization, 2 souls perfectly matched, And outside, the horses settled in their stalls, the desert cooled under the star-scattered sky, and the ranch they had built together stood solid and true, a testament to what could be accomplished with patience, faith, and enduring love. The story that had begun with fear and ended with trust, that had started with a broken woman and a patient cowboy and grown into something magnificent, that story was complete. But the love at its heart would continue, unshakable and eternal, a beacon of hope for anyone who had ever been afraid and needed someone to teach them to trust again.